to the March episode of Fintech Firebrand. I'm Virginie O'Shea, founder of Firebrand Research, and I'm here to chat to you about this month's FinReg and FinTech news. Now, unfortunately, with what's going on in Russia and Ukraine, I think there's little else that we can think about to kick off this episode. Obviously, humanitarian crisis going on over there, and something that is impacting everybody, I'm sure, from watching the news and the like, but obviously most impactful for people in the country and in the surrounding countries as well. A lot of pressure on global leaders. There's been a lot of change from the political viewpoint to try and put pressure on Russia to end the conflict. Now, as part of this, we've seen sanctions emanating from various governmental organizations across the globe. The EU has been a very strong force in this. We've seen different sanctions being imposed from each individual market against Russian entities and individuals as well. So there's been a lot to monitor from the compliance perspective this month. Certainly has been challenging for a lot of the large financial institutions that were heavily invested in Russia. Certainly they have not been able to mobilize their assets. There's been a freeze on being able to sell assets from the Russian side. So a lot of investors are struggling on that front, let alone obviously the humanitarian crisis and the impact that that's having on people in the country and outside of the country as well. It certainly has been a very significant thing to monitor. Hopefully the conflict will end relatively soon. We're all fingers crossed hoping for that in the coming weeks, if not sooner, hopefully, as negotiations go on. But an important force to see is the power of the sanctions and in convincing governments to change their minds. So certainly we are seeing the impact of that on the financial markets. The ruble has been crashing through the floor. We've seen the price of oil go up and gas. Certainly there's been a huge impact on the commodities markets because Russia being a large producer in those, especially to the EU markets. So we're seeing some interesting moves on that front. But from a sanctions perspective, obviously, a lot of banks have had to focus on understanding their exposure to those entities, to any instruments that may be Russian owned. And having a good handle on these things is certainly very important in today's markets, because as we know from many other examples, sanctions can change from day to day, new entities can be added to the list. So obviously the impact and importance of compliance technology and being able to track those entities, those assets using sanction screening processes, very important in today's market as well. So we'll keep an eye out on the ongoing challenges there and fingers crossed, as I say, for some resolution. Now, on the FinReg front, we've seen some interesting developments in the US, with the SEC proposing for more transparency in the private market space. Now, this is a particularly opaque bit of the industry. The SEC is keen to see more regulatory transparency, more regulatory reporting in that area, though there has been a lot of negative pushback from the industry on that front. There's a comment period open at the moment with regards to private funds and the potential negative impact on the venture capital area within the US markets, because that's obviously one of its strong growth markets. There's fear that by adding too much information, too much transparency, there may be a negative impact on competition in the market and from an international perspective. So we expect a lot of interesting comments during the comment period and a lot of discussion about the future of private funds, and for that matter, a lot of progress around technology in that space. I know I listened in recently to a DTCC webinar where there was discussion about the transparency they're adding with their blockchain pilot in the private market space. So certainly there's a lot of progress in certain areas, and it's interesting to see how the regulator will view these in light of its focus on transparency going forward as well. Another interesting FinReg development is around the development of supervisory technology. Now, I listened into an FCA webinar, I want to say a few weeks ago, where they were talking about their progress in interpreting suptech, what they think about suptech, how it fits into their innovation agenda. Now, certainly that's something that a lot of regulators are focusing on, and we could see some very interesting developments going forward around RegTech and suptech this year. year as we're dealing with lots of different issues. There's a big reporting regime change for the CFTC as well. They've been talking up their data analytics capabilities over recent years, and the FCA is also talking about how it's using things like natural language processing and AI to be able to deal with the deluge of data it receives from firms on a day-to-day basis as part of their regulatory reporting, their financial reporting as well. So certainly there's a lot to be said for interesting new startups in that space, and we could see some more sort of fintechs backed by regulators in the future, as regulators such as the Monetary Authority of Singapore are giving grants to various fintechs and investing in them directly. So we may see more of the regulators, national regulators, taking such an approach to foster more innovation in their domestic markets. And last month, we also saw CSDR's settlement penalties come into force. Not the buy-ins parts, but the settlement penalties. Now, I've been talking about this area for quite a while, as I've been talking about T+1 and the discussions around that. But with the CSDR penalties, it'll be interesting to see, hopefully this month, later this month, we may see some information about the kinds of penalties that firms are dealing with, whether they're passing on those, prime brokers are passing on those penalties to their clients, or they're deciding to suck up the costs themselves. So it will be interesting to see how, with these different credits and debits flying around, how they're accounted for by the various firms out there, and how many penalties we're talking about. Given ESMA's Trends, Risks and Vulnerabilities report came out earlier this month and showed that settlement penalties are much higher across all of the asset classes than they should be. We are expecting there's going to be a bumper lot of penalties coming out for various firms, and how they're dealt with is going to be a fascinating thing to see. As I said before, I'm sure this could cause a wave of panic buying for the middle and back office in terms of manual process support and replacement. So watch this space for that one. Now, my final thoughts for the month, as always, will turn, this is International Women's Day that I'm talking on, and it's International Women's Month. History Month, I believe. So we should be talking about getting more women, supporting more women, and in all areas of financial services, including fintech. Certainly there are a lot of interesting initiatives, agendas. We're seeing a lot of messages coming, the usual sort of platitudes from all of the big brands about International Women's Day. I would love to see more of that than just one day a year. Certainly it's very important to recognize the gaps we have. We've got a lot more data than we ever used to have on the gender pay gap as well, and how firms are addressing this in a concrete way will be playing a part in their ESG scores going forward, not least of which is addressing the gaps at the top and the disparity of numbers of women in senior management and across the sort of different levels of a business. So I'm very hopeful that we'll have more progress this year. Unfortunately, some of the statistics, or that you have everything from 30 years to 100 years before we get equal pay, as some of the estimates I've seen. So hopefully 100 years is not what we end up with, but hopefully it's more like 30 years and I'll be able to see it in my lifetime. But it's an important thing to recognize that more transparency around this area is very important for the industry as a whole. And it's gratifying to see lots of different initiatives in this space. On the conferences front, I saw a new startup called Hello Choir, an important one there to try and make sure that women's voices are heard and diverse voices are heard as well at industry events, and we're not ending up with lots of manuals out there. So I like to see, definitely like to see startups in this area trying to address some of these issues, and that in particular caught my eye, as I think it's an innovative way of dealing with a problem that conference organisers cite they have in being able to find women that can speak and not having any recourse to the fact that we end up with manuals at various points. So progress. In the meantime, obviously, I would encourage allies and women to speak up as much as possible around this topic, make sure that they're getting their voices heard. And likewise, I am never shy about talking about gender or any other kind of diversity initiatives. So I think that's an important thing to factor going forward. And I'll leave you with the thoughts that hopefully we won't have 100 years to wait before there is equality across the sexes.